Put my jacket on, ladies. Whoops. All right, I think we're ready to go. So I am going to call to order this virtual staff meeting of the Hamilton County Board of County Commissioners, July 28th, 2020. We've got lots on our agenda today. We wanted to start out with a resolution. We are going to be flying the flags at half-staff in honor of John Lewis. And so we have drafted a resolution because we wanted to talk about, the service of John Lewis. He's, obviously a civil rights icon, a living legend, really. And he has recently passed away. And so in order to pay tribute, we have crafted a resolution. Thank you both for looking at that and offering suggestions. And so I'm going to just read it in part and then ask for a motion to approve of the resolution. Okay. All right. So again, I'm going to read it. It's a 3-page resolution, so I'm just going to read parts of it. But it's a resolution directing county facilities to fly flags at half-staff in memory of civil rights icon John Lewis. Whereas Representative Lewis became heavily involved in the civil rights movement as a student, organizing sit-ins at segregated lunch counters, bus boycotts, and other nonviolent protests, and was arrested and jailed many times for his efforts. And whereas, while chairman of the SNCC, Representative Lewis was one of the 6 leaders who organized the March on Washington in 1963, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech, and Representative Lewis was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington at age 23. And whereas on March 7th, 1965, which became known as Bloody Sunday, Representative Lewis led over 600 marchers in a peaceful march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, where they were met by Alabama state troopers who discharged tear gas and brutally beat many of the marchers with nightsticks. And whereas Representative Lewis was beaten so badly that his skull was fractured, but he managed to escape the assault, and even before going to the hospital, appeared on national television to call on President Lyndon Johnson to intervene. And whereas in 1986, Representative Lewis was elected to represent Georgia's 5th congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives and was reelected 16 times, serving nearly 34 years in Congress. And whereas Representative Lewis passed away on July 17, 2020, at the age of 80 from pancreatic cancer. And whereas through his unyielding commitment to justice, Representative Lewis left an indelible mark on our nation as he held our union to account for its founding principles, serving as a champion for those for whom the American promise remained unfulfilled. And whereas Representative Lewis will be sorely missed by his son, John Miles, his family, his friends, and our country. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of County Commissioners of Hamilton County does hereby direct the Department of County Facilities to fly all flags, half-staff, at county buildings on Thursday, June 30th, the date of the funeral, 2020, in remembrance of Representative John Lewis. So that is the resolution in front of us. I will make a motion to approve, and upon a second, we'll have a conversation.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so that we'll take that as the second. And then, please, any comments related to the resolution?
I'll save my comments for Thursday. Just a Renaissance man who survived and endured through all decades. So that's something very unusual and special. So that's all I have right now.
Representative John Lewis has just always been an example to me. Just a wonderful man. He started when he was so young, which makes me think that he always knew what he wanted to do. And I just admire that so much.
Thank you. All right, so thank you. So clerk, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Drewhouse?
Yes.
Commissioner Summer Dumas?
Absolutely, yes.
Commissioner Parks?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so we will be flying flags at half-staff then on Thursday, all day, at all of the county buildings. Thank you for that. All right. Next on our agenda is a presentation from MSD to update the board on a Mount Washington source control project. So, do we have Director Christie on the line? We sure do.
Uh-huh. She's
Welcome.
on there.
And I know there are others, but Diana,
Yes.
are you going to kick this off?
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioner. I'm going to kick this off and give an overview. I have Ryan Welsh, Chief Engineer, on as well today. So I thank you for giving us this opportunity and taking a little bit of time to do a project update. I wanted to do a quick overview since it has been over a year now since we were before the board on this project last May. This is a project that is in the Mount Washington neighborhood. It is primarily along 3 streets, Woodlark Drive, Mayland Drive, and Lusan Terrace. And the existing combined sewers in the area drain to a CSO. It's a combined sewer overflow number 182. And ultimately the sanitary flow, not during wet weather, leads to our Little Miami treatment plant. The project was initiated due to a series of sewer backups that occurred beginning in 2011 through 2016, where we saw a large number of the homeowners on these streets experiencing sewer backups during 3 storms, 46 approximately of the homeowners. The system-wide model was showing that the combined sewers in the area were able to convey flows up to about a 10-year storm, but beyond that, we were experiencing these overflows. So typically under our SBU program, once a property has multiple, meaning 2 or more sewer backups in a 5-year period, they're eligible for what we know as our sewer backup prevention program that has been in place. And over the last 10 years, we've installed over 1,000 prevention program devices and made improvements to property to prevent backflow of wastewater to their home by installing something on their property that then MSD owns and maintains going forward. That traditional approach was not feasible here in this neighborhood for a couple of reasons, primarily because of the large number of homes that needed a solution in this close proximity. And we knew that installing the devices, we would have been creating overflows downstream without doing something more. So with that, a little over, I guess about 2 years ago, MSD had proposed doing the traditional sewer backup prevention program approach, but coupled with an additional effort with the homeowners to do more separation and installing even green infrastructure solutions on their property to keep the stormwater from getting into the combined sewer and therefore not causing any problems downstream. That pilot that was proposed, it was discussed with the county commissioners, was really rejected by the community once they understood what was being designed or what was being considered and proposed. And the community really felt strongly that they wanted a solution that did not involve work on their property and around their homes. They were concerned about the changes to their landscaping and just the amount of construction work on private property. So following that community input and concern that was raised, MSD looked at alternatives and engaged further with the community to find solutions that might be acceptable. And we then came back and proposed last May, which is what was approved, a different solution. And that is what we're talking about today. And that's the project that's been advancing. That solution was focused on, it's a change in the project, still addressing the sewer backups, but focused on capacity and detention in the public sewer system within the right of way, rather than that alternative SBU approach that we had proposed. Specifically, the project will install separate storm sewers that we do not have today. Again, it's a combined sewer in this area. on the streets Woodlark Drive, Loose Sand Terrace, and Mayland Avenue. This will convey the stormwater runoff from the streets and the yards that currently goes in the inlets on the street. It will convey that flow through these new storm sewers that would be installed. They will, though, that flow will go back to the combined sewer downstream of this neighborhood before it gets to the combined sewer overflow. So this project in particular was not a full separation. It was the beginning of a larger solution that is required to address the CSO and one that is required by the WIP, required by the consent decree. The project that was approved by the board for design, again, the primary objective was to reduce the risk of SBUs in the neighborhood without increasing the risk of flooding downstream. In addition, a secondary objective was to reduce the downstream CSO, or at least setting us up for the future project, the full project that is needed to address that CSO from the WIP. That is a project that was planned for in the county's phase 2A. And then finally, this is, if you will, a pilot still. So another objective that we had outlined in our business case evaluation was to kind of develop an alternative solution for SBU prevention that could be replicated in other neighborhoods. This is really a first of its kind for the SBU prevention application. So that brings me to the status update. Again, the board approved design funds last May. MSD then proceeded with advertisement and awarded a design contract to a consulting firm, Jones Warner. That was in September of 2019, and they began designing the project thereafter. So as the detailed design phase has progressed, as with all of our sewer projects, the planning level goes on what we have in the record, and once we get into the full analysis of where the existing utilities are, which do not always align with where they were believed to be. Oftentimes we learn that there are going to have to be changes, and we're really refining the design to optimize what was the proposed alignment for this storm sewer installation. Earlier this year, it was discovered that in particular, there was a pretty significant conflict with the Duke gas pipes in the street. Not unusual, but something that wasn't identified until we got into that phase of the design. So that conflict required a modification of the design. And then even more recently, during the design phase, as we've gotten even further, we have discovered that the installation of the storm sewers will require a disconnection and reconnection of the building sewer laterals. So the pipes that connect the properties to the street, to the sewer in the street, and this is the sanitary line, does have to be disconnected and reconnected. And we are concerned that those reconnections will require construction in some of the front yards. It all gets complicated based on the elevations of the basement and floor drains in the at the homes, and where those connections need to be in terms of reconnection, how you can do that with minimal disruption to the property. Because that particular issue was not anticipated, we also are looking at schedule impacts. This project, one of the reasons it was very favorable, not only were we not expecting to be on private property, but we also anticipated a favorable schedule by not having to acquire much access from private property owners to do the construction. And as soon as we get into a project that requires a significant amount of acquisition, even, temporary easements, if you will, for the construction to occur, there is a schedule impact that cannot always be, accelerated because every property owner, has an opportunity to review the plans. So at this point in time, we know the schedule is impacted, and we also know that the construction on private property is going to be a concern to the community and is a concern to some of the community members who we have been in frequent contact with. For that reason, and what we wanted to share with the board today, well, let me just start by saying that during the planning of the project, the overall design of the project was anticipated to take about 18 months. And we were looking at a construction start, even this year in 2020. December of 2020 was one of the anticipated construction dates. Unfortunately, these challenges and anticipated coordination with the property owners puts us in a position of, moving that construction start date out to sometime in 2021, and just some uncertainty in terms of how long that will take. And so, that is the status of the existing design. At the same time, we are considering alternatives, not to change dramatically the scope of what we're doing now, but really to the existing project to do more of what we will need to do to complete the full WIP project, if you will. If we do more of the project now, we believe there is a possibility that we could minimize and even eliminate that construction work on private property. That is because if we make the connection back to the combined sewer further downstream, we can reduce the amount of storage that's required in the existing storm sewers on those streets. So that alternative approach or kind of expanded scope is something we have just recently in the last several weeks seriously started considering and having our engineers dig into further. We have reached out to the county team to begin that discussion as well. And that work is underway. We're not prepared at this time to say whether or not it's, that we have a new, an alternative or a change in the scope, but that's the status of it today. And I think that the additional work is still in line with what needs to be done ultimately for this area and for this CSO. And we believe that if we need additional funding, the board had planned for design funding for this work in 2021. So we'd be looking at perhaps accelerating that to start sooner with the additional work, essentially. But again, it's a little premature to say if that's a better alternative. But I know it's, the community concern here is something that we're really mindful of in terms of the impact on private property. So with that, that's the overview, the high level overview. Again, Ryan is on. We can talk further about some of the specifics or any questions that you all have about the design criteria and anything else. So.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I remember the meetings out in the community out in Mount Washington. And there were a number of different alternatives that were offered, and they coalesced around different ones. But so where is the community on this? Right, and I hear you say really there are two designs. One is the original, where and it entails additional disruption to private property and other things, and then this other one that is more recent that is very different from that one. So have you gone out to the community again with this alternative that you've recently thought about in the last few weeks? Or not yet?
Yeah, let me just clarify that. So, the existing project, the community has been, there's been various updates provided. It's been a couple months, but, they're aware of and they were supportive of, in large part because the work is in the street, in the public right of way, although it's, significant construction and tears up a whole street. That was something that the community, is really where this project, the planning has been taking place. This recent discussion about it kind of expansion, if you will, I've had discussions with a few of the property owners. They have a kind of ad hoc committee that several of the residents sit on and like to get updates, and one in particular that communicates with me very regularly. So we've had phone conversations just to keep them up to speed. They want to see us moving forward, and they understand, and in fact I think they've really appreciated a lot of just involvement and learning how these projects progress. So I think that they're understanding of the schedule impacts, and they just want to make sure we're not stopping, that there's no stalling of this. So if we need to pivot and look at something, it wouldn't really, we're meeting the same project objectives. What we're proposing is just, if again, kind of extending a little further downstream, there's a larger segment of the combined sewer that we could connect to further downstream. So it doesn't impact them directly. It's more about the schedule impact and the time it would take to get there. So ultimately it would still have the same resulting solutions that they're looking for.
So commissioners, I was going to ask Holly Chrisman because I know the city and the county have been talking through some of this, to weigh in here before we go to questions with your deference, or would you prefer questions first?
I would prefer to talk to Diana, since she just gave out this information, if it would be okay, so it doesn't get lost.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, do you have an overview of your summary you just gave? Hello?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, I do. I had a project update sheet that was shared with Assistant County Administrator Holly Chrisman.
Okay, so I always talk about seeing that stuff ahead of time, and whatever the summary is, I'd like to, I've been going on for months that I need to see it ahead of time. And I think that helps the interaction, and also it helps, it kind of minimizes my questioning. So I would like to have a summary from you. And you were saying it's not really a major change, but if I'm hearing you correctly, it may impact directly the intrusion of the resident's property, whereas that was not given as an option before. So there is a direct impact if you have to go into their property. That's a major impact. And then you talk, during the planning process of any sort of project, of course, I'm not an engineer, but I've sat in when we've looked at sewer upgrades and things like that. And you were saying that Duke Energy, you found some lines underneath there you were not aware of, some sewer drains you were not aware of. Waterworks is another entity that's usually involved in that planning process. So I'm just really concerned in the planning process. I know we have change orders, but this is almost a whole different project. You discovered this, you discovered that. And to me, it's like deja vu. When you come and MSD comes before us, it's just a different name of the location. It's always, we found this, we found that. Now we have to ask for more money. So I'm just saying, for myself, I'm really having an issue. Not that we don't get under there and realize there are some minimal things that we didn't know about, but these are major things that we did not know about. So I'm just really concerned about what that planning process is, because you have everybody at the table And then just also the impact to the residents, because of course the timetable is going to have to change, but it's really going to impact them directly. So that's all I have. I really don't have any questions, but once again, for the past year, I've been asking for information ahead of time, every time that you guys come to me. So once again, it's Chinese to me, because if I had known what your summary was going to be or your overview, I could direct my questions. I made some notes and did that, but it needs to stop. It needs to stop, and I need an overview of whatever you guys are presenting to the county. I need it. I don't, if you gave it to Jeff, you gave it to Holly, that's good. But I'm sure there's not a problem with you sending it to me.
Commissioners, if I could.
I see Jeff and Holly lighting up.
Yeah, sorry. So if I could, so we did get a project summary from MSD. I believe I forwarded that to the board yesterday morning, but please let me know, check your emails and make sure that came through. But I just wanted to.
I received a summary, but it was not the same as this overview she gave. I mean, I want specifically this overview, what you were going to let us know. So, and I'm sure she had it written somewhere. So I did receive that, Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Parks?
Hi, Diana.
Hi,
So I have a couple questions. So if I understand correctly, when you do this, you are trying to figure out if you are going to use the process of the infringement upon property owners' front yards, or you will go further downstream for the disconnect and then the reconnect, right? And if it costs more money, you want to take that from what is allocated in 2021. So does that mean that there will not be any additional money requested, outside of what we have already planned upon?
Sure. So I'll go ahead and address that. So with the existing planned project that is under design, if we continue without, altering that scope, we don't feel that there's any alternative but to reconnect and the laterals causing more disruption than we anticipated. That in and of itself does have both a schedule and some budget impact.
Do you know how much?
No, I don't have any estimates yet on that because it entails, some right-of-way work, which we're holding off on doing if we're not going to need to do that. But the alternative that we're discussing is really just kind of doing more of the future work now versus doing this small phase and then doing that work later. So it's not additional total project cost. If you look at the entire solution as one project, the county had in its phase 2A additional funds for that, and this would be in line with that total project cost, at least based on what we know now. So no, it's not coming, and again, right now we're just talking about design funds to get us to have detailed plans, costs, and estimates that we could bring forward and get construction funding from the board. So we're not in a position right now to estimate the cost of construction of any alternative, only what we know today.
Okay.
I think that, yeah, go ahead.
So help me understand, is the fact that you have to disconnect and reconnect, that's new, right?
It is something, it's within the existing design. The reason it's new is that, the alignment of the sewers and the laterals conflict greater than we had planned for. So disconnecting and reconnecting a lateral within the roadway would not have caused any disruption on the property. It's more about potentially to, and that's where it gets kind of technical, but potentially having to, we call it chase the laterals up into the property, because you have to have that flow, that gravity flow. So you can't relay it sometimes just within, by that connection. We would need to go further up to the property to get the proper elevation. And that is what has been discovered through the design. And I think, I know Ryan could jump in here because it is frustrating. However, the planning process, really, there's no way to know, and it's not unique to MSD. I mean, all utilities, there are certain things that are on plans, that are on the GIS that we base planning off of, and that all utilities do. But really, until you get into the detailed design, which is what we're doing, and it's why we do detailed design, you don't just start digging and find these things. That's when you find out exactly where all the utilities are. And the Duke gas pipe, for instance, was incorrectly, somewhere identified to be somewhere up where it is. So that is, that's just, sometimes those things happen, and the utilities are not properly marked in the records that we have available during a planning process, and you just don't know until you get into the detailed design.
Okay, I have one more question.
Sure.
So when you change the location of the disconnect and reconnect further downstream, is that, am I right about that?
Yeah, so just to, because I might be mixing up the terms. So the disconnect and reconnect of the sewer laterals, that's the property, that's the individual laterals all along the street. The design of the existing project has us building storm sewers, and then there's a junction where we have those new storm sewers connect to our combined sewer. Proposing moving that junction further downstream, and that is the not yet fully fleshed out proposed alternative.
Do you anticipate that costing more money, or is it in line with what we currently have?
We
So-
anticipate
speak to that.
costing. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan. You can.
So I'm asking, is more construction necessary?
Well, what we're seeing right now is if we proceed with the current design as planned, and we have more of these conflicts in people's front yards, that drives the project cost up.
Okay, but if you take it downstream,
What's that?
but if you take it downstream,
Then we can avoid a lot of those connections that not only are disruptive to property owners, to homeowners, and delay the schedule because we have to require easements from them, but it could also potentially, if we can avoid them, we'll spend the money by making the connection downstream and lower the cost by avoiding making connections in people's yards.
so will that present new challenges, or?
It's a very challenging project, no matter how we do it.
Mhm.
As Diana mentioned, we don't anticipate that the overall project budget will go up. This project was in the county's Phase 2A plan back in 2018 at over $10 million in current dollars for total project costs. What we were attempting to do here was solve the most pressing problem. That's the sewer backups, by taking a minimalist approach, and I don't think we're
And it's
expanding
not working.
as well as anticipated.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam President, if I could just ask one additional question, whichever would like to answer. The Mount Washington sewer system, just in your guess, how old is that sewer system? The original? How old is it?
Ryan, you have.
It's getting close to 100 years old.
Okay. So when you look at the plat that indicates where sewers are and water lines, and how old is that? When you have your planning meeting and someone brings in from Duke Energy where things are, how old is that? Is it revised? Is it updated?
Yeah, every utility is allowed to put their own infrastructure within the right of way, whether that's
Right.
water or gas, electric, telephone. They don't always have as-built drawings that accurately demonstrate where their utilities are.
So I guess my question is, how old was the information that they provided us, would you say, from Duke Energy?
I don't think it was necessarily wrong information, but it's rather a lack of information, which is determined.
I didn't say it was wrong. How old would you say the plat that they showed, as far as where the sewers were, when the sewer system was shown? And so when Duke Energy showed you what was underground, how old would you say the information we were using? Was it 80 years old? Was it more recent?
They don't send us information drawings to look at. When we can request markings in the field, and we can go out and dig it up and find it.
Well, is that unusual, Ryan? Because I know in Lincoln Heights, when we were building this road and sewers were involved, we had everybody at the table to actually show us their plans of where the wires were and where the sewers were. So
I think generally speaking, the newer a development is, the newer a neighborhood is, things have been installed more recently than they would have good drawings. But when you're talking about houses that were built in the 1920s and 1930s, I wouldn't expect Duke to have records or drawings where they could pull out and show us those.
So we just kind of guess then when we go down where the wires are and where the sewers are.
So in the design phase, like we are right now, and we have been for a year, that's when we make sure, so that we locate these and identify them prior to bidding the job, and keep the cost down to keep the risk off of the contractor.
And so we are actually doing it, not Duke Energy, not Waterworks, we
Right.
are MSD.
It's our designer.
Okay, that's all I have, Madam President.
Thank you. Hey, Holly, can you weigh in on this?
Sure. Good afternoon. Yes, as I think Diana and Ryan alluded to, they have been meeting with the county team over the past few to several weeks to talk about these newly identified challenges. And we, both Joe and Karen are on here so they can answer any specific technical questions that I'm not able to. But what I would add is both MSD and the county team are continuing to look at the alternatives described and to look at the project challenges, and in the hopes of coming back with an update and a recommendation at a later date. And so I'd like to, at this point, if Joe or Karen, or I see they're both on, if they wanted to add anything specific for you or answer your specific questions. But what I'm hoping is the two teams can continue to work together and come back. Maybe I'll look at Diana and Ryan and Joe and Karen to see maybe if the 30 days is enough time to come back and present an update once more information is available on alternatives.
Okay. Joe's lit up. Joe?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to add, we met with Ryan and Diana on July 10th, learned about the information reported today, and followed up with some questions. And so, as was described, they're doing their evaluations and planning, next steps. And so we look forward to having a meeting with them in the near future to find out what their ideas are and what their recommendations are.
Okay. Okay.
I would also
Yes.
offer, can I offer?
Mm-hmm.
We also, you may recall back when there were meetings in Mount Washington, there were 4 alternatives that were presented. I think we need to step back and take a look at all of the options available to us, and try to sort out which one is best to go forward with at this time.
Okay, so this was truly an update and not a request for anything at the moment. So I do want to say that I'm glad that the county and the city teams are having conversations about these things so that we can remain in the loop as decisions are being made. I am with Commissioner Parks and the concern about cost. I heard you explain that it's just a matter of getting the project done sooner than later, and the money was intended to be there for this project. So that makes sense to me. So, all right, well, we'll look forward to hearing back from you. And did you say 30 days was a good time frame, Diana?
I think we will be certainly in a position to have discussions with the county team in the next 30 days. I think it's up to the preference of the board. I was envisioning if we were prepared to present an alternative and therefore request the design funds, I was looking at September, maybe even October, but we're going to do our best to get it done sooner. So
okay,
I can say 30 days, but
I'll leave it to all of you to figure out the best
Yeah.
timing. If we can get something and be kept in the loop, I do think it's helpful. I mean, the updates are very helpful. And we're supposed to have you in on a regular basis anyway. So,
that'd be fine.
Yeah, okay. Very good. Well,
Thank
we'll
you.
Madam President, I would lean toward 30 days because we're on a fast track. There are a lot of questions, I just think we need to stay in contact. I know they're meeting with Holly and Karen, but I'd like to hear an update in 30 days.
I think our preference would be to return to you with a request for additional design funding. And if we can work with the county team, I think we could have that ready within the next month.
Okay. So those are additional dollars, and they're in addition to the design that you had previously talked about.
This would be taking funding that was in the county modified, county approved CIP slated for 2021 design and advancing that this year so that we can keep the work moving.
Get the advancement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right. We'll see you in 30 days.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is the COPS grant application proposal. Got Captain Tony, is it Oru?
Yes, it is. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I didn't mean to mispronounce. And is the, oh, well, look at the table. Well, now I can't see all of you very well, so please introduce yourselves.
So it's Chief Deputy Mark Schoonover.
My name is Akshita. I'm the intelligence analyst for the intelligence unit.
And me, Captain Aru, and that's the three of us here for the sheriff's office.
Okay, thank you. All right, so yeah, talk us through this application.
Okay, very good. So earlier this year, as the Department of Justice and the COPS office does, there was an offering for it's called a COPS hiring grant, and this is an opportunity for agencies to apply for federal funding to conduct community-oriented policing to solve crime problems through partnering with the communities and conducting problem solving. So when we saw this grant, it was in alignment with some strategy changes we were doing with the sheriff's office, so we decided to apply. It was due in the early part of March, and so we'd been in a waiting period to find out, and the Department of Justice reached out to us at the end of June, letting us know that they had awarded us the funding for 10 officers, which there's a federal share and then there's a local share. But we wanted to talk to you about what the grant means, what our objectives are, and why it's important to our community. So if it's okay with you, I can share our screen, which is going to, we can go through a short PowerPoint.
Okay.
We'll do that now. Okay. All right. So as I discussed, this grant is in alignment with some changes here at the Sheriff's Office. And just so you're aware, since 2017, the Sheriff's Office has been doing some internal discussions about becoming more of a reactive law enforcement agency to something that's more research and science-based, some best practices that we see both nationally and all over the world, and also do some data-driven practices here. And so we adopted this strategy called intelligence-led operations back in December of this year, which also created the formation of the intelligence unit. Akshita and I are the two members of the intelligence unit as for now. But this strategy does use our entire agency to bring together our information, our data, to create intelligence that can address the crime disorder and the potential threats in Hamilton County. So that is our purpose. So this grant, because it is designed to, use data, use evidence, and partner with the community, it was just in alignment with what we were already doing. So we decided to apply for it, and the grant itself is not just designed to offer additional officers to a police agency. Rather, it's designed to inject some money to that agency for hiring officers so that they can be used for a very specific purpose. And you have to pick a problem, a crime problem that's in your community, and use those officers along with other techniques and strategies, which we'll talk about in a moment, in order to address that problem. And so I'll let Akshita talk a little bit about the problem that was decided upon.
Okay, so the grant expected us to focus on one problem area, and we looked at all the statistics and the crime rate for individual jurisdictions that we patrol as the sheriff's office, and we decided that Lincoln Heights and all its crime offenses, Part 1 crimes, that's homicide, assaults, robberies, burglaries, and rapes that consolidate of that set of crimes, they were at a very higher crime rate compared with the crime rate of Ohio and for the rest of the United States. We did these calculations, and for per 1,000 residents, we found that rate to be very high, almost 4 times and 5 times higher than the rates in Ohio and US. And that's why we further analyzed on what exactly is causing that crime rate, and we looked at our data and noticed that there were a lot of shootings and homicides involved arising out of gun violence. So that's the reason we picked out that problem. And we were also expected to sort out solutions on how we plan to reduce gun violence using all the strategies. The intention was to reduce the number of incidents, reduce the number of offenders and repeat offenders, and improve our response to the problem. So these 3 objectives will also lay down our framework for performance measurement that we can report to the Department of Justice at the end of the 3-year period. So we would be looking at achieving these 3 goals most importantly when we report to them. Going forward, our basis in community policing is by involving the community only as a resource so that we can use the combination of problem solving and the intelligence-led operations as well as the data-driven strategy, combining it together and using community resources to solve the problem. So there are 3 and 4 components mixed together under each one of them as subsets. Under community partnerships, the most important key is that we enhance cooperation, we earn their trust, and we build stronger relations with them so that they can rely on us as service providers. They can call upon us whenever they find some threatening incident happening, or they can establish that bond with us. And when they see that we can procedurally, in a just manner, go on with our activities and duties, and we can be more approachable, that's how we can approach civic-based organizations, other NGOs, and faith-based organizations to build these partnerships, attend different events, make sure the police presence is very frequent in those areas where the community is present, and basically establish that connection. Secondly, speaking about the problem-solving portion of it, for problem solving, we first need identification and analysis, which will be guided by the data-driven practice. So when we study all the data that's coming out of Lincoln Heights, and then we can use all of that to exactly determine what might be causing or what might be a correlation for the problems, and we can point out to the fact that there are certain attributes that are responsible for that problem. And then we can go on to having tailored suite of responses for providing a solution to them. using the community resources. So in brief, that is what the grant and the community-oriented policing is all about.
And
Moving-
this,
yeah.
if I can interject
Sure.
for just a moment here, it may seem like this ask for officers is just an attempt to get officers there to over police or heavy-handedly police the community, but it's actually quite the opposite. We can talk about training in a moment, but these officers are actually going to, the hope is to get less people involved in the criminal justice system than more. So this isn't just an attempt to get officers there to do zero tolerance, heavy-handed policing. It's really, these officers, we really want them to be community-oriented type of policing. We're going to insist upon that and train to it as well. So I'll let you continue.
Sure. And then, as you see on the strategy here, we decided that a geographic systematic assignment of officers only dedicated to that location would be most suitable, because Lincoln Heights is about 0.94 miles in radius totally, and presently we have a limited number of officers with limited and more constrained nature of how we can reach out to each mile, and I mean each direction to keep a watch on what's happening around. So when we have a systematic arrangement for which particular officers will be assigned to which particular street segment and intersections, we'll have a more widespread approach in there. So that's what the geographic assignment is. Further, despecialization would mean that typically we have task forces which would only do exactly those objectives and in a more trained and a specialized manner. But despecialization would mean that everyone who is responsible there are all trained in the same skill set and all those same capabilities, so that not one person or not one independent task force have those abilities. Everyone gets to do that, so that eventually the whole operation is successful. And speaking of specialized training, CIT would be crisis intervention training. The COP is the community-oriented policing training, where they will be educated in what principles exactly harbor community policing. And it also includes problem solving in that. Implicit bias and equality training. So these are again going to be our metrics to check whether each officer has completed that training, applied that training effectively, and how well they have made use of it and how much they can retain it within their working memory. Next is the strategy implementation from top to bottom. Typically, when a strategy is implemented, it could only go from the upper management all the way down to the patrol officer. But this would engage the patrol officers also to feed back into the upper management, so that it's an agency-wide initiative where even the officers get to have an opinion of what can be done better in those in the geographical area. So there's a very clear, transparent communication of the strategy that we are following, and these officers can later on speak to it that this is what has been successful in this area, and the same can be applied in the rest of the jurisdictions when we notice that there has been a considerable difference in the way we are doing things. And lastly, it's the crime and intelligence analysis aspect, to which I'll add to it later as we go ahead. This is what crime analysis and intel analysis looks like. So if we first start with mapping. Mapping would be more of a visualization tool, so that officers can exactly see where there is a crime happening in which particular location and at what times of the day, in what days of the week, and what periods of months in a year. So this, in technical terms, is called spatio and temporal analysis. After we have mapped it out, we come on to clustering. In clustering, we look at the street segments and intersections and facilities and places where most crime is likely to happen in a more concentrated manner. So the law of crime concentration says that there's 80% of crime originates from a specific location, rather than it being dispersed and in a more uniformed manner. So we want to look at all the crime concentrations and the distributions both at the same time, so that we can see where we need to focus our efforts and resources. After we have seen all of that, we come down to analysis and we look at the patterns that are recurring. We find similarities in the types of offenses that we will see. We want to see which offenders and what kinds of targets and what are exactly the crime generators and the crime attractors of a specific location. We cannot do much about treating the offender since that is much beyond the scope of this, but what we can instill instead is the situational and the place-based in criminology in this. There are certain aspects of the environment that induce people to commit crime, attract them to that location. So the intention is basically to increase the risk, increase the effort involved, reduce the provocation, and reduce the reward that the offender finds in these places. So rather than making it a crime attractor, we are making it a more risk-prone area by treating the place itself. That's why all these intense technology studies will go into investigating the place itself rather than expanding our scope onto the offender, because that's more of a corrections theology. And after all of this, we finally move on to getting intelligence. The threat assessment is more like an emerging hotspot or an emerging pattern of crime that will help us notify that these specific areas, after monitoring them and after looking at all these patterns that the data is telling us, it's quite likely that this is what is going to happen. And so before any harm is caused, we can take proactive efforts and try to control it. And that is the threat assessment at the ultimate level. So at each stage, if you notice, we can find more solutions. Sometimes we might not need to move on to the next stage. We can find answers at either of these stages, but taken together, they solve a much bigger question. And ultimately is the problem-solving aspect. This picture locates crime right at the center, which means that the crime happens only when there is a motivated offender, there is an attractive target, and when the target lacks a capable guardian. When this target, in either of these elements, if they are missing, the crime will not happen. So we are trying to make the target less attractive. We are increasing the guardianship of the target so that the offender feels less motivated to commit that crime. So instead of looking at the whole picture and treating crime in a more reactive aspect as we have been doing in the past few decades, this particular crime triangle will help us to exactly focus on either of these three elements and then just focus our efforts in treating them. So together speaking, problem solving is not just about looking at the manual or doing things by the book. It's more about creativity and innovation in which we can exactly point a finger to the fact that this is what is happening, and we step inside the neighborhood and we see there's something amiss here. What would we like the ideal state of the neighborhood to be? And then work backwards from it. That what is it that is preventing us from being that ideal state of neighborhood? What are the gaps in between? And so problem solving of this nature is just going to help us inform more on that.
And I'll just say also that this is community-based trust building, relationship building. And we recognize through our studies that many problems in the community have solutions that don't involve the police. The over-policing is often not the solution. However, when we look at the key problem that we're trying to solve here, which is gun violence and homicides in this particular village, that is our responsibility. It's our responsibility as the policing entity for Lincoln Heights to partner with the community, because public safety is a community effort. It's not solely on the shoulders of the law enforcement agency. So that's really what we want these officers to do. You know, it's going to be the intelligence unit that does the heavy lifting when it comes to analysis and the data and the intelligence, but it's the officers that are going to be walking the streets and riding bikes and going to the community events and meetings and meeting key leaders and trying to get the community to understand that the police are there not to create an oppressive environment, but one that the community can thrive and actually grow. And that is essentially our mission here. The last thing I'd like to add is the COPS office, again, part of the requirement of us is that we undergo organizational change. And so we don't want to change policing in Lincoln Heights alone. We want to change our entire agency so that we police in a more effective, efficient, responsible manner, using research, using our partnership with the University of Cincinnati, using, we have some very good staff here, very educated and very capable staff to do better, to serve better, and have a better return on investment for the money we spend for our public safety. And so the grant itself that was granted to us for these 10 officers was for $1.25 million. Using the projections of what officers cost these days, the total for the entire project is $3.557 million. So the federal share would be $1.25 million, and the local share would be $2.3 million. So the way that the DOJ would want us to operate is that as long as we're spending the money in a way that the federal share goes down over those 3 years, it doesn't matter what percentages we do. So we could use the majority of the money up front and then and decrease it over those 3 years, as long as the 1.25 is the limit for the federal, and then we have the remaining balance. The other requirement is that we retain the 10 officers for 12 months post performance. So it's 3 years of performance and then 12 months after that we retain the officers. And when it comes to the end of the grant, we could be at a crossroads there. What do we do with these 10 officers? Well, I'd like to tell you that we are going to be very driven to make this successful, not for the sake of success, but to actually reduce the violence there. If we can be successful in that, and we can show that value to Lincoln Heights, to the rest of the Hamilton County community, and to the Board of County Commissioners, then I think that a decision can be made on maybe this can be used in other places to do the same thing within the county. However, if it's not proven to be an effective strategy, then the Sheriff's Office does have a fairly regular stream of attrition where these officers can fall off of our number of FTEs over a relatively short period of time. But there is a little time to look at the numbers, look at our performance. We can't hide crime. We can't hide shootings and homicides. That is some of the least underreported crime possible. So I think the numbers will speak for themselves. And I think we have a really good shot of doing something very positive for the Lincoln Heights community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I've got a number of questions, but I'll ask a few and then we'll move it around and we'll just ask as we go. So there are 10 officers that will be hired for the effort here. And I appreciate your perspective of, or rather the concern about over-policing. In Lincoln Heights, we've all been to Lincoln Heights. It's a very small jurisdiction. It's a village. And I am concerned about the idea of the perception of that. And so it will obviously be on those officers to interact in a way with the residents where they build the trust and there is a common understanding that it's not over policing. It is more of a holistic approach to law enforcement. So I appreciate the approach, but what I'm wondering is if that takes time or is not successful, particularly on the front end, how do you go about monitoring success? Because my understanding is that this runs for a couple of years. So how during that time frame do you say, have we achieved our goal in making sure that people in that community don't feel over-policed?
So the goal is the reduction in violence. That is truly our objective. And when we talk about increasing trust in the community, well, that's definitely a very difficult metric to measure because that's something, academically speaking, that could take a number of months and possibly years to do surveys and follow-ups and some very detailed statistical analysis to measure something like trust. So what we have to do in this short period of time is to look at the metrics that we can measure. We can measure the number of community contacts that are made. We can measure the number of meetings that are attended, community events that are attended, referrals to community public services, all kinds of things that we can measure We're not looking to measure tickets and arrests and, minor misdemeanor citations for things that, again, these officers are going to be very specifically trained on what we want from them. But ultimately what we want to see is the connection, if not a correlation, we want to see at the same time an increase in those performance metrics and a decrease in crime.
Okay, but I hear you, and I understand that you need to have measurable, things to evaluate. But you're saying that those metrics are related to crime. I understand that, but you're also talking about a new way of policing, and so I think it will be important to make sure that as you try to accomplish that, that there is some way to measure, and I don't know if it's a scientific measure, if it's a data-driven measure, or more of an anecdotal measure, but this seems to me like a very different approach for the sheriff's office. I applaud you for it. And I just want to make sure that the community, Lincoln Heights, in addition to the overall community, understands that this is an attempt to police differently in these communities in a more holistic way. So on that note, who do you expect to be the partners when you talk about trying to approach these individuals in a different way? Do you have community partners in mind already to which you would refer people?
We have and had discussions with Lincoln Heights, and we understand that, and we haven't been in contact with them yet, but we're told through council meetings of civic organizations, nonprofit organizations, and religious organizations that as a starter, those we know exist, and so those are the first we'll start with, are the leaders of those types of organizations in the village.
But you don't have any partners identified yet, specifically like treatment providers and that kind of thing.
Well, as far as the partnerships of other kind of services that we can bring in, we have been working with some of those in a less of a hands-off way over the years. I think we're going to build those partnerships with everyone that can be referred into the community, or we can refer community members to these services. That's going to be our job, is to make those connections very early on.
Yeah.
And like you said, that's different for us.
Yeah.
And we want to change that.
Okay. Commissioners?
I had a comment, Madam President. I think it's a great plan, great presentation. I think it would be money well spent. Lincoln Heights doesn't often get money spent in that direction. So I think it's a strategy to deal with police reform that the county is looking at pursuing. And I think it's great. The presence of the sheriff department is nothing new. They started when I brought them in, I think it was 13, I think Schoonover or the chief can tell me correctly. There was some opposition initially because I had to disband the entire police department. So there was some resistance. But after that time, about 9 months to a year, the residents were extremely excited about the relationship with the sheriff department, and all those things that we're talking about, the community policing, to me is not very new, because they were out there playing basketball and going to the community. Now we have money to proceed. We had quite a few officers out there in 2013. It is a different approach. I'm really excited about it, and I think we can do some great things. And not only that, I think the data that we collect for the 3 years that we have this program will lead toward additional funding going to Lincoln Heights, because of course the crime has a reason. There's a reason why people are shooting each other or raping each other. And so that area, as we all know, the jobless rate, the education level, the poverty, all those things are residues of this aggressive behavior. And if you guys can prove through your data what's going on, we can use your grant to proceed further to get money for other grants to help the residents that are in there that are suffering and not having economic stability. So I'm really really excited about this program.
Thank you. Commissioner Parks?
So, do I understand correctly that right now, Lincoln Heights doesn't know that this is coming?
Oh, Lincoln Heights is aware that we applied for this grant. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you have worked in partnership with them.
Yes, in fact,
And,
there's one other grant we applied for with them, which is a community-based crime reduction grant. It's not for personnel, it's for technology for data-driven policing. And so we discussed the application of this grant during that process, during their open meetings and so forth.
And they are a formal partner in that grant because they entered with us in a memorandum of understanding with them. Now, subsequent to it, if we receive that news about the CBCR grant, then that could turn into an agreement. But they were made aware of the cops hiring grant during that process.
okay, so you are in contact with the community association out there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Can I interject, Victoria? I talked to Mayor Ruby Mumphrey earlier today, and she is aware of this and she is supportive.
Okay. Well, I think it's exciting, really innovative, and what we need to turn to, during at this time. It sounds really sophisticated and smart to me, and I'm excited. I'm excited that you guys have that kind of foresight. So, go Sheriff's Department.
Thank you, ma'am.
And it looks like the sheriff has joined,
Yeah.
Yes.
right? It's hard. It's really hard to see you guys, but yeah, it looks like Jim Neal back there. So thank you for jumping on. Okay, so I had another question for you. Oh, it's about the budget. So my understanding is that these dollars to match the federal grant are coming from the sheriff's budget. It's a shuffling of some dollars that were already allocated. So is that true? And so we're basically we're shifting priorities. Basically, is what we're doing here, and trying to help out, what the project in Lincoln Heights.
So I think, commissioners, this is Jeff. So I think what we had talked about as a potential, I think we still need to work some of this out with the sheriff's office over the course of the next week or two, before we bring this forward to the board, is how to go about funding this internally. Obviously, it requires a match. We had placed into the sheriff's budget for the 2020 budget the ramp up of personnel costs dealing with various divisions. And this, what we had talked about, at least internally, was the idea of utilizing some of those dollars for this particular program. So I think that's something we can talk with the sheriff's office about. In addition to, as the captain referred to earlier on in his presentation, some type of an MOU or something as the board passes a resolution to accept the grant, some type of a resolution or MOU that would talk about how success is going to be measured and what the strategy will be down the road on either expanding this if we're seeing the success that we all hope and anticipate we will see, or what the opposite response will be if we don't see. I just think we need to plan ahead and think for that. And the captain was had indicated that earlier on in his meeting to us as well, with us as well, that they were absolutely committed to measuring success on this proactively. And I just think we need to think about that as we approve the resolution for the grant.
Okay, thank you. So can I ask a very basic question? How many homicides take place in Lincoln Heights on average per year?
You have those numbers.
I do. I do have the crime rate though. But it's just speaking between 18 and 19, when we had to collect statistics for the CBCR grant, we noticed there were at least 3 shootings in a year. And when we look at that average compared to the rest of Ohio, the crime rate, to be very precise, in Lincoln Heights is 90.91, and the state of Ohio is 4.8.
Yeah, I was just trying to get a baseline because that's
Right,
right.
the measure, right?
Mhm.
So, okay, thank you for that. That helps kind of level set here what we're talking about. So, all right. So Sheriff Neal, I think we're about finished. Do you want to weigh in on the program?
You were earlier, I heard you talking about partners, and one of our partners is the veterans group because of mental health response as well. So we're working with them as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, thank you all for bringing this to us. Jeff, what's our timing here?
So we want to, again, we'll talk with the sheriff's office to nail down some of the specifics. I believe we have technically 2 bites at the apple here. We could bring this forward by leave if we get everything hammered out. I think the last day on which the sheriff's office can indicate acceptance of the grant is the meeting on, Captain, is it August 13th? Is that correct?
The 11th of August, yes.
The 11th of August. So I think that would
that would be one day before the submission of the answer to them.
Got it. So I think that might be a staff meeting. So
Okay.
So we technically have a couple bites of the apple here. We'll try to get things wrapped up as quickly as we can. And if we can bring something by leave, we will. But if not, we would have at least one other meeting when we could pass something on this.
Okay, that sounds great. All right. Thank you all. Thank you for applying for the grant and looking at a different way to do policing in Lincoln Heights. So we appreciate your initiative, and we'll look forward to passing this when it comes in front of us.
Okay.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
the
much.
opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Our next item is the Banks project update. And so I've been reading about this in the paper. So I've asked Jeff to give us an update about the disconnect that we've been hearing about between the city and the county. You know, we've been working on this cooperative agreement since from my calculation, August of 2019. And so I know there was a call last week with the mayor and Commissioner Parks. And so just wanted to get an update on what's happening and what is impacted here.
Certainly. So thank you, Madam President. I'll give a brief update. I don't want to go and spend a huge amount of time on this. I did give Bridget a couple of slides that I'll refer to here. So as she's gone ahead and put one of them up. So just so that people can see the area that we're talking about here, we've got, you can see the banks in lots 1, 13, 25, 27, 28, 23. 27 is largely the lot where the music venue is currently being constructed. 23 is where the park will ultimately be constructed. So as you know, and as you're aware, the county and the city both agreed last April on a financing mechanism for phase 3B of the banks, and that shoe shaped essentially 25, really 27, 23, and 28 is really what is considered phase 3B of the banks. And back in April of 2019, the city and the county both passed ordinances and resolutions respectively talking about how that next phase of the banks would be funded. And the county agreed to advance roughly $6.5 million of what would be the city's contribution to advance this portion of the banks, in large part due to the opportunity to site a music venue to draw individuals down to the banks, but also the acquisition of a $12 million state grant to build out this infrastructure. So that agreement on funding still stands today. And as you may recall, in the fall of last year, there were some city zoning issues related to the music venue and some things from a zoning perspective that some hurdles that needed to be jumped through. Commissioner Portune at that point in time had made a plea at one of our public meetings to the city to eliminate those hurdles and allow the music venue to continue forward. That plea resulted in a meeting that was, I think, well publicized between Commissioner Portune and the mayor at Commissioner Portune's residence. Issues discussed at that meeting. I was on the phone for a portion of that meeting. I know Commissioner Parks was there. Some of the issues discussed were as simple as things related to revenue sharing with the SkyStar Ferris wheel, to the city's request to develop certain air lots at the bank. So that meeting ended with the charge for the administrations to work out the details on what is called a new cooperation agreement, or how the city and the county work together on the bank's project. As we began those discussions, it quickly became apparent that the city was looking to do some things that the county had not yet agreed to, including entirely eliminating the master development agreement for the banks. And for context here, the master development agreement, or the MDA, is the legal framework that provides all the essential terms on how the public infrastructure like garages, streets, utilities are funded, financed, and operated in a sustainable manner to make sure that the city and the county's general funds ultimately are not impacted. Bridget, I think I've got some of the term. I think one of the slides relates to the master development agreement, just so folks get a sense as to kind of what's entailed there. Bridget, are you able to put up the second? Oh, there she goes again. Okay. Yeah, so this just, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just so you see the different things that are contained in the master development agreement, the different developer contributions, the minimum build requirements for certain blocks. Yeah, you can go ahead and click on that other one, Bridget. The relationship of the development to the urban design master plan, how capital repairs and O&Ms are handled, deferred purchase price from developers. So a lot of things that have financial relationship to the project are included here. And ultimately, well, I guess to say that this is the entire underpinnings of the bank's financial framework is included in the MDA is probably an understatement. I mean, this is really what makes the banks successful, and what made it tick, and it's largely worked. It's helped guide us through a recession and get development done during a major recession, and keep things moving in a way that has not implicated the county's or city's general fund. So I think I have one additional slide, Bridget, if you wouldn't mind, just in terms of those master development agreement elements. I don't know if you can zoom in. This is a slide I just pulled up from the past that includes a couple of different things. But if you can see, section 3 of this slide shows what, at least currently, what our estimate is that these different elements of the MDA are worth, on the county side at least, not even on the city side. So you have the reimbursement from a developer on parking garages of several $1 million on different lots. You have deferred purchase prices. You have the city and county share of TIF revenues that spin off of the development. So all told, you're talking over $100 million that is controlled by the master developer agreement. All things that help make sure that the project stays sustainable. So you can see what's at stake here ultimately. And the county ultimately never would agree to simply end the MDA without some type of a replacement or alternative in hand. And that's what we had indicated to the city in our initial meetings. Certainly not without a broader public discussion. And from what Commissioner Portun had told us after the November meeting, was that he had not agreed to that either. I think the perspective of Commissioner Portun, and as translated to the board and as carried on now by Commissioner Parks, the idea was that the city and the county would each have the control of selecting the developer and the types of development that would occur in the air lots on those banks, but that ultimately that would be under the context of the MDA or a suitable alternative or replacement to make sure that we didn't lose the ultimate financial benefits and the assurances provided by the MDA. So ultimately, Commissioner in terms of what the county is looking for here, and you mentioned the word disconnect, I think the county ultimately wants to complete the banks in a successful and a sustainable manner. We want an amended cooperation agreement that preserves the financing framework of the banks, or, as I said, some sort of viable alternative or amendment to it that preserves that financing structure, including things like the assurance that both parties are equal partners, that the county has always received the parking revenue off the garage. The city has retained the earnings tax and admissions taxes. So we want to make sure that that framework is protected. We did have a productive meeting last week. Both the city and the county agreed to work on some things to try to get us to a point where we're on the same page with the cooperation agreement, and that's where we currently stand today. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I would defer to Commissioner Parks. She was also in the meeting last week and was in the meeting of last November as well. But I hope that at least gives you some idea as to what the discussion is about and why there's a little bit of a disconnect right now. And it really focuses on the perspective as to whether or not we are continuing with the current master development agreement, or as the county believes, or the city, which has proposed moving on to an alternative, but we don't have a replacement yet.
Thank you. So Commissioner Parks, why don't you weigh in?
Thank you, Madam President. The meeting last week, it was really progress. We made a lot of progress. It was productive. I felt like we came to a better understanding. We were able to address certain items and get resolution on them on both sides. But like you and Jeff say, there are some disconnects. What I realize is that my number one job, my job here as County Commission, the reason that I'm sitting in Todd's seat is to protect the integrity of what Todd wanted, his words, his intentions, and actions. Now, he worked on this for 20 years, and you know how passionate he was. There is no way that he wanted the development agreement blown up. We know that it is the foundation of what makes this work. And so, under no circumstances did he want it changed. And I'm hoping that nobody is suggesting that. And if they are, then bring something else that makes sense, something that we can work with and that they can work with. And I know what they said in that meeting because I was there. Mm-hmm. And I'm just not going to let anybody put words in his mouth. But I do believe that we can get this done. We're at a good place if we work together the way this has been, the way it was in the past. I just, with the disagreements and changing things that we have not agreed to is disturbing to me. So I am optimistic. I do believe that we can do this. And so I'm just hopeful and looking forward to getting this done.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So Commissioners Summer, Dumas, do you have any comments? I'm going to ask a couple questions.
No, Madam President, just wanted to thank both of you for the clarity, and I have no comments other than that.
So I have a question. So related to this then, so there's this disagreement about the MDA and what was agreed to at the meeting. And Commissioner Parks, I heard you loud and clear saying that the expectation was the MDA would stay in place and we would work around that to give the city the ability to develop 2 lots, the county the ability to develop 2 lots, all in the context of the MDA. The city's perspective on that is that the MDA no longer stands, and that and albeit there is no other MDA, right? There's no alternative, and so things are kind of left, right, with who has to do what, who gets what, what is the cost share, the cost expense, and so I can see how that is very complicated. And
well, Madam President, from what I understood, it's not that it doesn't exist. It's what is going on right now is that it's not being adhered to. You know, there's things going on that is not in the MDA. It's different. You know, we have not agreed to the actions that are being taken.
Okay.
So, you know, so it's I don't know what ignoring what has stood for 20 years.
Okay.
Wouldn't you say, Jeff?
Yeah, thank you.
At least in terms of some of the things that are in some of the versions of the cooperation agreement, correct?
Okay. So, so here we are. So as we work through this cooperative agreement, and as we work through the issue of the MDA, the music venue is going up. The parking garage is all but finished and completed with the partnership with the state. And so when I hear these comments about a delay being created by the disagreement that we're obviously still trying to work out here, as recently as last week, there was a meeting about it. What's being held up by, you know, the conversations continue, negotiations continue. So what's going on?
Well, Commissioner, I think I can, in terms of where we are right now, the county had, as you said, the music venue is being constructed. The public infrastructure under the music venue is in its final phases of execution. The public infrastructure under the Lot 23 Park the board approved the trade contract number 10, which was the final phases of that public infrastructure. Really the last piece of this is the Lot 23 Park, which is trade contract 9. The county procured for that, and the board executed that contract back, I believe, on April 16th, pending the city's execution. So technically, every contract that is necessary to complete the banks this phase of the banks obviously has been executed or is in the process of being executed by the county. So so there should be nothing ultimately that is delayed. Now, I think the city's perspective on this is that they want the cooperative agreement to be executed prior to trade contract 9 being executed. But they are only partially related in a sense that there is a segment of the cooperation agreement that talks basically about how the parties will work together to execute the Lot 23 Park. But largely that is something that we could, if the parties desired, find out a separate way to move forward on. So technically, Commissioner, to your question, there really isn't a need to delay anything. Now, the city has indicated to the county in the past that I referenced the funding arrangement where the county is advancing the city funding for its portion of phase 3B. And the city has said that until there's a cooperation agreement penned and inked that's acceptable to both parties, the city was going to hold on its reimbursement to the county on this. And the county understands that. That's the perspective from which we have both been moving forward. But in terms of actually completing the project and just getting everything done, I don't know that there's anything that really should hold up anything at this point. If we can get this done quickly, of course, we all want to, and we want to move ahead and just get this all behind us. But there shouldn't be a reason to delay anything.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So just to be clear then, music venue going up, but by the way, the private dollars doing that. Infrastructure is almost complete. County, state paid for that. We've got a park. It's a city park being paid for through park board funds. The county has, in my mind, generously said, we will front the money for that, knowing that we will be paid back by the park's funding for the city park. And so we need to sign a trade agreement by this week and we've signed it. The city needs to sign it to just start getting it going. And then we've got this cooperative agreement over here. And so, Jeff, what I hear you saying is that there could be a vehicle to, if the city were to sign the trade agreement, then everything can move forward with the park, and we continue to work on the cooperative agreement. And if we need to sign some kind of MOU related to the park, or we've already agreed on the funding structure and how things are to proceed, so that it's being tied so closely to the cooperative agreement is the problem here, and why it's not moving forward. I mean, we've done what we need to do from my perspective. So anyway, I just it's just a little frustrating that we are continuously having to argue on this point because it's been going on for a long time. I'm sorry, Commissioner Parks, do you have another comment?
Yes, I paid the mayor a courtesy because we got a phone call from the press. And so I just called him and told him that there were questions and just requested a meeting so that we could sit down and hammer this out. And we were all very surprised that on the day before the meeting, there was this 19-page memo that really misrepresented anything that we were saying. So, we just want to get this done. Mm-hmm. It will spur economic development. There are very many reasons to do this.
Right.
And there's no reason for it to be stopped.
Madam President, I had a question for Jeff. Jeff, you were saying that the city is not really delaying anything. Of course, we want them to sign the cooperative agreement, but if they do not sign the trade agreement, that will delay.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Commissioner. What my intent was to say was that there should be no reason to delay anything. That yes, we need to execute the trade contract 9 in order to move forward. But we should be able to get to the point where that can be done, irrespective of the cooperation agreement that the city ultimately, and they've said that they want that executed first. I understand that. However, we are up against a deadline in terms of getting trade contract 9 executed in a way that would hold the current pricing. So if we could find a way, as Commissioner Driehaus said, to work it out where we can move forward on that element of the project and keep discussion going on the cooperation agreement, which is going to control how the parties work together on the future of the banks after this phase, then that is an option. But yes, to your point, trade contract 9 needs to be executed in order for there not to be a delay of the Lot 23 park, correct?
Thank you.
And so, Jeff, I heard you say there that not only is there a delay, but there's a cost.
Could be, certainly. So certainly a cost in terms of a delay, but holding the current bid pricing, we would have to, my understanding is we would have to rebid trade contract 9. I don't know what the implications of that would be.
Okay. And what is the deadline for the city to sign?
I believe the pricing is held through the 30th.
Okay. Which was the reason for the meeting last week, right?
Correct.
Was trying to get this off the dime. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So that's the update on the banks. Thank you both. Thank you for the work you're doing to try to move this forward. It's an important issue. Commissioner Portune worked very hard to make this happen. Had a meeting when he was in very difficult circumstances and had a certain understanding here. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing trying to move that forward. So thanks to both of you. All right. Yeah. Is there anything else related to that?
No.
Nothing from the administration.
All right. Very good. Thank you. So we have another item here. This is a reoccurring item, unfortunately. The Hamilton County Board of Commissioners, it would be a declaration of state of emergency due to COVID-19. So we keep doing this because we're so hopeful every time we do it that we won't have to do it again. But here we are. And by the way, I didn't mention it at the top of the meeting, but things are okay in Hamilton County. So we are looking at numbers, and I'll talk more about this at the briefing tomorrow with Greg Kesterman, but our numbers are relatively flat right now. Now, remember, they're elevated numbers. So the numbers of positive cases are higher than they were a couple of months ago, but they have plateaued. Our hospitalizations are pretty much flat as well. The death rate is moving around a little bit, and Greg will elaborate on some of the factors that go into that, because we're dealing with such small numbers that just a couple really create a deviation there. So he's going to expand on that a little bit tomorrow, but and we are under a mask mandate, as we all know. We're in the red on the governor's map. So we're still in this state of emergency. We're doing a lot of good work with the CARES Act dollars. We're working on that with the federal government as well to get some flexibility for those dollars. But we need to continue to declare a state of emergency. And so unless there are questions related to this, we've done it a number of times before. I will move that we declare a state of emergency due to COVID-19 in Hamilton County.
Second.
Commissioner Dreehouse?
Yes.
Commissioner Summer Dumas?
Yes.
Commissioner Parks?
Yes.
Madam President,
Yes.
if I could just briefly for those watching at home, you may have said it, but the state of emergency that the county passes is also necessary to ensure that we can take advantage of certain emergency procurement provisions under the Ohio Revised Code. Some of those were recently expanded through some legislative action as well to make sure that we can efficiently and quickly purchase personal protective equipment for the community, that type of thing. So it's got some operational importance for us as well.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity. All right, commissioners, I'm about to move that we go into executive session. Is there anything else?
I have nothing.
I have nothing. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to move that we go into executive session pursuant to RC Section 121.22G2 to consider the purchase of property for public purposes, the sale of property at competitive bidding, or the sale or other disposition of unneeded, obsolete, or unfit for use property.
Second.
Commissioner Dreehouse?
Yes.
Commissioner Summer Dumas?
Yes.
Commissioner Parks?
Yes.